A school bus picked up my kid 4 days ago. After he was gone, I just went about my day like I always do. When school was over, I waited at the end of our driveway, but a school bus never came. When I called the school, they said my son had never arrived. He got on the bus, I told them. There was silence. We don't doubt he got on a bus, they told me, but it wasn't one of ours. When I started freaking out, they told me I wasn't alone. The same thing had happened to 18 other children this morning, and the police were on top of it. When I asked what that meant, they simply said, they're working on it. They know. I keep going back to that morning trying to remember something, anything, but the same things that I remember are the reason I wasn't paying attention. The bus was yellow. It was long. It had wheels. What am I supposed to remember about a bus? The thing pulls up, and you kiss your kid, and that's that. 5 times a week, and the routine gets so redundant a submarine might have pulled up, and I'm not sure I would have noticed. 3 days ago, the parents of the missing kids got together at the rec center to put their heads together, support each other, and grieve. Everyone was crying and rerunning the theories they have for days. Some of them are absolutely bats hit. There wasn't any complicated thread connecting the kids, really. They were all in elementary school, lived in the same neighborhood, and that was about it. Some people think the school is covering something up. Or maybe the bus company. But all the drivers are accounted for, and the school's got nothing to gain. Everyone local knows about it already, and some parents are keeping their kids home until this is figured out. 2 days ago, the parents received something in their mailbox. It must have come in the normal mail. In a little white envelope, there was a drawing from their child. All were of school buses exploring something different. The edge of a cliff. The bottom of the sea. A barn on fire. The thickest, blackest woods. On the back of the drawings, written in cursive, was the same black handwriting, neat as a crew cut, it's just a little trip. Yesterday, halfway to California, the police are saying they found a field with 18 scarecrows. Each was wearing our children's clothes. At the edge of the field, scratched in the mud in big letters, were the lyrics. The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. The wheels on the bus go round and round all the way. This morning I'm standing on the curb, and I've picked up smoking again, and I'm waiting for the bus to come back. I've done it every day, of course, in the morning and after school. Every day, I'm twice as terrified as the last. I hear the diesel, and a bus comes rolling around the corner. The bus is yellow. The bus is long. The bus has wheels. The bus has children. But none of them are mine. A few miles north of me, there's a little family-owned farm. The family takes a vacation in July, though, and they posted a job listing for a caretaker. My job would include feeding the animals, making sure the irrigation is working, and harvesting some crops. It's a small operation, so it's not fields and fields of stuff. Plus, they were offering $2,000. At the time, that seemed like an amazing deal. Now, I'm not so sure. See, the Gershons left me detailed instructions in the envelope, along with half of the stipend. And as I sat down to read it, I realized that it sounded a little strange. Dear Emily, thank you for taking care of our farm. To ensure your safety and happiness, and the animals, we've included a list of instructions and tasks. 1. Please feed the goats and chickens at 6 a.m. sharp. They get pretty cranky if it's not on time. 2. You will need to prune off the floricans in the raspberry patch. To do this, cut the canes, branches, that are woody and have already fruited. Wear thick gloves because there are thorns. If you do get cut, immediately head inside and call Dr. Livesey to make sure your wound is not infected. 3. The sunflower field is easy to maintain and brings beauty to our farm. However, if you ever see a sunflower that isn't facing the same direction as the others, immediately head inside. Do not return to the sunflower field until the following day. 4. The farm is, as you know, surrounded by forest. Sometimes we get coyotes, foxes, or other wild animals prowling about the grounds at night. Don't worry, the animal pens are completely secure and there is no need to check on the animals if you hear anything at night. In fact, we recommend you do not leave the farmhouse between sunset and sunrise. 5. Do not enter the corn maze. Even if you hear noises coming from the maze that sound like a child crying, do not enter. The corn maze is not open to visitors yet. It's most likely the bobcats in the woods. 6. Do not be alarmed if you see the goats awake in the middle of the night. They are semi-nocturnal and often wake up to roam, graze, or use the bathroom. 7. You may help yourself to any of the fruits or vegetables you harvest. However, do not eat the apples from the northwest corner of the orchard. 8. We no longer use scarecrows. If you see one, please return to the house, lock all the doors, and close all the curtains. Stay inside until the following morning. 9. Make sure to always stock the farm stand twice a day, in the morning and again in the afternoon. At night, take all unsold produce inside and store it in the refrigerator. 10. We do not own any pigs. Thank you so very much, Emily. The Gershons. I glanced out the window. The sun was hanging low over the trees, orange rays filtering through the forest. Damn it, if I'm not supposed to be out after dark because of the wolves or whatever, I better get cracking. I walked over to the goats first. They huddled close to me as I filled their food bins, staring at me with their weird slit pupils. I tried to get it done as quickly as possible. Goats, honestly, freaked me out a little bit. As I hurried away, one with black and white fur pushed its little face through the fence. Maria, it bleated, staring at me. The chickens were more skeptical of me, staring at me and letting out long bow walks as they bobbed their heads. As soon as they realized I had food, though, they came over and pecked the ground. They were pretty cute, actually. I locked the gate and turned back towards the house. I froze. Across the field from me stood the field of sunflowers. Bright golden petals and dark centers, swaying slightly in the wind. But while all of them tilted away from me, facing the dying sun, one of them, near the edge of the field, was instead facing me. I stared at its pitch-black center. Didn't the note say something about that? Go inside if one of the sunflowers is pointing a different way. I locked up the chicken gate. Then I strode across the grass towards the old farmhouse, still carrying the bag of chicken feed. I was halfway to the house when I turned around again. I wish I hadn't. The sunflower was still facing me. Even though, based on my path, it shouldn't have been. I picked up my pace towards the house. Oh, come on, what do you think's gonna happen? That sunflower is gonna chase after you and murder you? My brain knew it was stupid, but there was something instinctual, a gut feeling, that forced my legs to pump harder. I didn't even bother dropping the feed off at the shed. I raced into the house and locked all the doors. Phew. Safe. I took a final glance out at the sunflower. Then I went into the tiny kitchen and started some water boiling for pasta. By the time I was sitting down to eat, I was shaking my head. So stupid. Afraid of a sunflower. Something woke me up in the middle of the night. I sat up, my neck aching from the crappy pillow they'd left for me. I looked around my tiny bedroom, but nothing seemed amiss. Well, of course there were things amiss, like the peeling paint and the light bulb that flickered and the clogged toilet. But nothing different. I yawned and checked my phone. 3:12 a.m. Sighing, I settled back into sleep. But before I drifted off, I heard it. A small, high-pitched noise. Coming from outside. I slowly forced myself out of bed and walked over to the window. Underneath me, the farm sprawled out into the darkness, but it was distorted in the old glass, shapes and colors bleeding into each other like running paint. I flipped the window lock and pushed it open, the wood squeaking loudly in my ears. I listened. Silence. Help me. A voice. A child's voice. Coming from the direction of the cornfield. That's no fucking bobcat. My blood ran cold. I stared out into the darkness, at the cornfield on the edge of the woods, hoping that it was just some lingering dream or something. But as I stood there, the cool summer breeze wafting into the room, I heard it again. Please. Help me. The voice wavered, as if the child was crying. I squinted into the darkness, staring at the cornfield. I have to go out there. I remembered the Gershon's rule, but there was no way this was an animal. Hey! I'm coming, don't worry. I shouted out the window. Silence. And then a rustling sound. I squinted at the cornfield, and I could see the stalks moving as something moved within them. Stay where you are. I shouted into the darkness. I'm coming to get you. The corn stalks continued to move, and every muscle in my body froze. The amount of corn moving, there was no way it was just a small child in there. The corn was swaying, dancing, roiling in an area maybe 10 feet across. And it was making its way towards the edge of the field. Rapidly. I shut the window. Then I closed the blinds, my heart hammering in my chest. I raced downstairs and checked the locks. And then, finally, when I was sure I was safe, I called the police. But they wouldn't even come out. There are no missing children in the area, and what you saw was most likely a bear, they explained calmly. I think they must know all about the Gershon's farm. So now I lie here, in my bed, listening to snaps and rustles of the cornstalks. There is a chair wedged under my doorknob. I've triple-checked all the locks. And all I can do is wait for dawn. Every room has an entrance. It doesn't have to be grand, it doesn't even have to be constantly accessible. Simply by its very definition, a room cannot be a room without a way in and a way out. Yet every rule has an exception. I've seen the exception to this one, deep within my house. So deep, in fact, that I have absolutely no idea where exactly this room is. But I know it's nearby. I've heard people inside, and I've even been in myself. Between me and my sister, my parents have 2 daughters. I was the last to get my own place, despite being the eldest by a year. My encounter with the room occurred only a few days after moving in. I wasn't doing anything in particular, I was just walking down the stairs. A perfectly mundane activity that we don't even think about a means from point A to point B. But what happens when point C gets in between? When we stop paying attention to where we're going, where do we end up? Each step creaked gently below my feet, something that doesn't bother me, but it did seem particularly louder than usual on this occasion. Perhaps it took more of my attention than I had realized, because on that final step, I tripped. Not enough to hit the floor, but enough to stumble and lose my balance. As I caught myself from my momentary fall, the house saw my temporary lack of concentration. The room changed. Walls of an off-white color surrounded me, with most of the paint cracking and flaking away with age. The floorboards were visible, and rough. Even through my socks I could feel the points of wood painfully pressing my skin. The air felt thick to breathe. A musty, dusty smell filled my lungs. The room was bright, although missing any specific light source. It simply seemed to emanate from a thick, twisted, wooden pillar in the center of the room. In one corner, an old mattress had claimed enough dust to be unsleepable. Even if clean, it didn't appear very comfortable. Needless to say, I was more than confused. My mind instinctively wanted to retrace my steps, despite the fact that I couldn't have possibly gotten lost. This was my home, with one staircase. I turned around to go back. it took this long for me to catch on to the fact that the stairs were no longer there. In their place, nothing less than nothing, even. There was no evidence of any way in or out at all. No windows, no stairs, certainly no doors. My claustrophobia began to set in. My mind had stopped searching for an explanation and was now only set on finding a way out, an impossible feat caused by an equally improbable room. I felt my heart rate rise and I dropped to the floor. Time felt like it was moving slowly. Every corner of my thoughts focused only on the walls around me. They may not have been closing in, but my fears were. As my knees hit the floor, they felt soft. They had landed on a gentle, almost woolly material. As my vision focused and my racing mind calmed down, I realized I was in my hallway. Sunlight beamed in through the window, reminding me that I was free to leave at any time. I immediately went on a walk. I needed to feel the outside air. I didn't tell anyone about this at the time. In all honesty, I let it slowly sink into the back of my mind. After a few days, I no longer thought of it. I hadn't forgotten. How could I ever forget something like that? I simply pushed it away. That was until my sister found the room. Just 5 days after my encounter, she dropped by to visit and see the house for the first time. I told her I'd give her a tour. The house seemed to take that liberty for me. I specifically remember being in my bedroom, upstairs, cleaning some things away. She always had the cleaner bedroom as a kid, and part of me just wanted her to notice that I was more mature now that I lived alone. I wasn't being loud. I would have heard the door if someone had knocked, I'm sure of it. But I never heard a knock. I heard her scream. It didn't echo through the house, it seemed to crawl up through the walls as a muffled noise. All around, her scream, even as I ran downstairs. "Help," I heard her cry, "where are you?" She sounded terrified. "Where are you?" I yelled back, repeating her question. I realize now that this wasn't helpful, and I never even answered her, but in the panic of the moment I just wanted to find her. Somehow, even on the ground floor, her voice seemed just as distant as it had upstairs. I opened the front door and stepped into the garden. Only then did the sound seem to change. It was clearly coming from within the house. I turned back around, yet as I entered the hallway, I bumped into my sister. We grabbed each other. Where was I? The question alone caused my mind to think back to my experience. I pulled away from her hug, now feeling equally as shaky. A room with no doors? Her silence spoke for her. She had seen it too. She began to explain. "You weren't answering the door, so I let myself in, and I thought the place looked strange, but I thought nothing of it." Another example of being unaware of your surroundings. As I closed the door behind me, it just disappeared. I ran around, and then suddenly, I bumped into you. And the room was gone. We sat down and I told her about my experience. We told our parents. I felt more confident in telling people now that I wasn't alone on the matter, but obviously, they just saw it as some weird ghost story. Spooky. Seriously, that was the first thing our dad said. The traumatic events were, simply by the nature of their absurdity, nothing more than a tale. His tune changed when he came to visit just a few days later. It didn't happen immediately, but it didn't take long. He had been sitting on the sofa with Mom for about half an hour. "Where's the toilet?" "Upstairs, first door you see. It'll be open." I felt slightly guilty. Deep down, I think I knew he would find the room. When he came back with a pale expression, I had my answer. My mom looked rightfully concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Are you okay, dear?" She spoke gently as she stood up to walk over to him. "He's seen the room," I explained for him. Mom's puzzled face showed that she wasn't exactly sure what I meant, so Dad finished the explanation. "The one with no doors." Mom, of course, experienced it too by the end of their visit on their way out of the front door. Dad was holding her hand one moment, yet the next, she was gone. Like the rest of the cases, she returned a few moments later, albeit shaken up. Everyone who visits gets to see the room. There are no exceptions. Every single person who has ever visited my house has seen the room at some point before leaving. Then, they are safely and promptly returned. What's stranger still is that it never occurs more than once. A single visit is all anyone ever seems to be permitted. Family members, friends, mechanics, delivery drivers that step just one step too far. If you step foot through that front door, you will be seeing the room. This has been true for 3 years, as long as I've lived here. It became almost charming. Last night, I met a guy whilst out with friends. He was nice, almost had a familiar sense to him. After chatting for a while, I told him about the room. Oh yeah, very funny, his skepticism was showing. I'm serious. Ask any of my friends here. They've all seen it. He didn't ask any of them. Perhaps he thought he'd sound just as insane as I did. You're just trying to get me back to your place. I smiled at this thought and played into it. Well, why don't you find out? He came back to mine. He seemed to pause when he saw the house, looking pale already. I had never had someone look so frightened of the room before even seeing it. I told him that there was nothing to be afraid of, and after a moment, he apologized whilst following me inside. Once inside, his composure became calmer. He immediately told me he was going to use the bathroom. Without even asking where it was, he simply assumed it was upstairs and headed for it. Odd, I thought, but my mind was more focused on the upcoming witnessing of the room. I was excited to prove his doubts wrong. Strangely enough, he came back without having seen it. It takes some time for some people. Let me show you around. The more you move around, the faster it'll happen. I gave him a tour of the house. When we reached the final door upstairs, my bedroom, he smiled at me. Maybe it'll happen if we go in there? I smiled back, knowing his confidence would be humbled once he saw the doorless room. As I turned my back to him and opened my bedroom door, I felt his presence vanish. Turning around confirmed my suspicion. He was gone. Oh my God, the sound of his voice crawling up the walls. Where am I? I told you. Believe me now? Well, yeah. How long does it last? A minute, at most, I spoke whilst laughing. Yet every rule has an exception. A few minutes and I started to get worried. After an hour, he begged me to help him. It's now been a whole night. His voice has stopped. The room had always returned people. Always. Why was this man the exception? I wanted to have helped him, but I'm not even sure where I would have started. Calling the police seemed out of the question. How would I even explain that the house had kidnapped somebody? I spoke to him all night, trying to help him find a way out, but we both knew he wasn't getting out until the house allowed it. Towards the end, he gave up. He started talking about how regretful he was. At the time, I thought he meant for visiting the house, but thinking back, I believe he meant something else. He kept talking about doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. The final words I heard him say before I stopped understanding him entirely were the most telling. She's going to keep me here. Is he talking about me? Or does he know something I don't? Researching my address further yielded an interesting development. He had been the previous owner of this house. Perhaps subconsciously I recognized him, intrigued by his familiarity. I never met the previous owner before buying the house, but it can't be a coincidence. I must have seen him somewhere before. I also found an old listing of this house, from a few years before I moved in. The original floor plan had a basement, something this house currently lacks. Could this be the room? A friend of his came by today to ask if he was still here. I explained that he had left in the night. His friend came inside. He never saw the room. The room with no doors has found its prisoner. It no longer takes visitors captive.